This video is going to make all of you keyboard warriors very upset because you've been commenting on our videos, telling us lots of information about paint protection film, like we've never used it before, telling us why we're wrong. So here's the deal. We've been doing this since 2011. I've been in the industry for a very long time. We are one of the largest xpel shops in the United States. We're like top 10. Hardly anybody does more film than we do. So what we tell you is kind of true. Are we biased? Of course. We make our living installing this stuff, but there's a lot of things that people believe about it that's not true. So let's start with that. Number one is that it is bulletproof. I don't know where people get this idea that paint protection film is impenetrable. You will never get another rock chip. We never say that. And if somebody does tell you that, they're lying to you and you shouldn't trust them. So I have a saying when I'm talking to people about PPF and talking about their expectations, I always tell them, big enough, fast enough, or sharp enough, it could penetrate the film. So here's some film on a laundry basket. Very high-tech testing. I can't punch through it. It's very strong. I can't really tear it. I know how to tear it, so I probably could, but no, not really. It's designed to be very flexible and stretchy and impact resistant. Now, some of you watching this, of course your fist isn't going to go through that. Your fist wouldn't chip paint. Yeah, I know. Just demoing it. Here is something called a gator blade. It has blade in the name. It's plastic. This is probably more similar to what's going to hit your car, a dull object like a rock. None of those penetrated the film. Are there little marks in the film? Yeah. But as I'm pushing on it, you can see nothing penetrated it. I'm not going easy on it. I'm hitting it about as hard as I can. Now, the pointy parts, maybe. Yep. Sharp enough. So if you get a rock that's that sharp, which is pretty sharp, traveling at 70 miles an hour, and it hits your car, and honestly, it's going to be different than this because it's not going to have this kind of flex. It's going to be more like this, where it's attached to the bumper. And even there, I don't know that it did penetrate because it doesn't have this give. Or something like a knife, obviously, is going to penetrate just like it would just about anything. But you can see this stuff's pretty resilient. Once it's torn, it's pretty easy to tear. But highly resistant to impacts. So the question becomes, well, does it work at all? Yeah, paint protection film works, and that's going to be the second misconception, is that it doesn't work. But back to the first one. Is it impenetrable? No. Is it effective? Yes. You will sometimes take damage to the film. Very rarely does it get through the film and damage the paint. If it does, chances are it's an insurance claim. It's something big enough. It would have been a really big problem without film. It's still a really big problem with film, and now you need to have something repainted. But that little like sandblasting kind of rock chips that you get all over the front of a car, where after 20,000 miles you look at a car and there's literally 1,000 small rock chips. Those don't exist anymore. The film absorbs those impacts and it allows that to basically completely dissipate. The self-healing properties are real. So misconception number two is that it doesn't work. It does work. It stops rock chips very effectively. In fact, my truck has about 26,000 miles on it now. I daily drive it. For those of you that tell me that all my cars are kept in a garage, I daily drive this thing. It's only a year and a half old. It's already got 25,000 miles on it. And there's like not a rock chip on it. We're going to do a video with that truck to show you this, but there's nothing that has penetrated the film at all, which means the paint underneath is in great shape. The self-healing properties are 100% real. You might think that that's some marketing scheme or scam. It is not. Micro scratches that you get from washing it, there's little tiny swirl marks and things like that. They don't exist with paint protection film because when they do happen, the sun basically bakes those out and it goes away and it self-heals. And the clarity is always really, really good. And I'm talking years later. It's not something that lasts for 2 weeks and then it goes away. Self-healing properties work. So number two, it doesn't work. It does. It stops rock chips and it self-heals. Number three is that there's this idea that it somehow ruins the paint underneath it. And I'm not talking about upon removal. There's a lot of people that think that the existence of the film on the paint is somehow damaging it, that the paint needs to breathe or it needs to whatever, or the film traps moisture. Simply not true. Paint does kind of need to breathe as it's curing. By the time you get your car from the dealership, it should be done curing. The only real exception to this is body shops. If they paint it and then put film on it right away, and they don't bake it properly, and there's a million different things a body shop could do wrong. I guess a manufacturer could too, but typically by the time you get it, stuff has been cured, and manufacturers usually bake stuff really well. Film is not going to damage the paint underneath just by its existence. Just simply not true. There's really no truth to that. It doesn't cause rust. It doesn't cause corrosion or anything like that. The water evaporates through it, and then once that is done from the installation process, which is only a day or two, there's nothing left underneath. It doesn't trap anything. Number 4 is that it doesn't last, or that it only lasts 6 months or a year or whatever. Now, this one, I can actually see, these last two, I can see where you guys are coming from, and let me explain a little bit. So, as I mentioned, I've been doing this since 2011, and in 2011, the technology was a lot different than it is now. In 2005, it was a lot different than that. So, I think it was around 2012 that xpel came out with xpel Ultimate. And that was sort of the new version of film that has a top coat on it. 3M did the same thing. They had their Scotchgard product that had a top coat, which it looked like garbage and it was borderline impossible to install. Super orange peely. So xpel was pretty revolutionary in that it had a film that had a top coat that was pretty clear, self-healed. That was like a lot of versions ago, and that film was great. And it did last. It probably didn't last the full 10 years, but it lasted a long time. Now, the big problem is that the older films, a lot of them didn't have a top coat. And they would crack, and they would yellow, and they would do all this stuff really quickly. So if it was a car that you actually drove and took outside onto the roads, that dirt and debris and all that stuff would kind of seep into the pores of the urethane, and it would turn yellow rapidly. The UV would break it down pretty quick, and it would crack really quickly. So you might only get 6 months or a year out of those films that are old. I think because of that, a lot of people think that that's still what we're putting on cars. Simply not true. If it were true, manufacturers like Ferrari wouldn't be telling their customers, hey, you have to get your entire car wrapped in this before it leaves the dealership, or we're not going to sell you the next Ferrari. Those manufacturers wouldn't be doing that if it was only going to last 6 months or if it was damaging to the paint, right? I put film on every single car that I own. As soon as I get it, I wrap the entire car. I would never do that if it was only going to last 6 months or a year, or if it wasn't going to work, or if it was going to damage the paint underneath or any of that stuff, right? It doesn't make any sense. I keep my film on my cars pretty much as long as I own it. We have a short where we're removing film off of my Lamborghini mirror, and people love to tell me that that's only able to do that because it's been sitting in a garage and all this stuff. And it's 7 years, it's time to replace it. It's older technology. We take that car to shows. People ask me, if it's only been 7 years, why are you taking the film off? We use it. We show that car off, and we're way better installers than we used to be, and the film that's on that car is not the film we're putting on your car now, so that's the reason for that. To answer the it doesn't last question, it does last. I can understand why you think that it didn't, because older films didn't, but for the last 10 years or so, film's been pretty rock solid. And last but not least, number 5 is that this idea that paint protection film is impossible to get off. And similar to the idea that it doesn't last, original old school PPF was challenging to get off. Newer films can be challenging to get off. If this is a car that sits out in the Florida sun every day for 7 years straight, it's going to be pretty hard to get the film off. I'm not going to lie to you. Typically, our customers are not in that situation. Typically, if they're getting their car wrapped or front end wrapped or whatever, the car is garage kept, or they keep a car for 2, 3, 4 years and then they get rid of it. Very rarely do we wrap a car and then somebody goes, I don't care about this car anymore. I'm just going to let it sit outside and rot for the next 10 years. It would make no sense to spend $8,000 wrapping your car and then just let it sit there. Yes, your comments are right. If the thing sits out in Arizona for a decade, then try to remove the film. That's true. But also the same could be said about the engine on a Ferrari. If you park the car and don't drive it, or you do drive it and you don't service it and you don't change the oil and you never clean it, like, those things are going to degrade too. So I don't think it's fair to blame paint protection film and call it a bad product when really anything that is super neglected is not going to be great a decade from now. Something with paint protection film that I think a lot of people need to realize, and we don't advertise this as a you do it once and you're done and your car is perfect forever. Parts like the bumper, maybe the rocker panels or the rear impact areas, those are probably going to need replaced every couple of years to really look good. You can leave it on there and continue to protect the paint, but the film is going to take some damage and you're going to be able to see that. I kind of equate this to tires. It's a consumable to some degree, right? If you're driving the car, you're going to need to put new tires on it every 10,000 miles, 20,000 miles, sometimes 3,000 miles if you have a GT3 that you're taking to the track. Paint protection film is similar. You're not going to have to do it every 3,000 miles, even if you do track the car, but every couple of years you might have to replace a bumper and a rocker panel piece. But if you have the roof and the hood and the doors and all that stuff done, the whole car, you're not going to have to replace that anywhere near as often as those high impact areas. Again, we know we're biased. We know. You don't have to tell us. You're going to tell us. That's okay. I want you guys to realize that this product is real. It does work. It's not a scam. There are thousands of shops across the country selling this. XPel is a publicly traded company that BlackRock owns a bunch of. They're not going to buy into something that's a scam that just doesn't work. So paint protection film is real. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that this helps get rid of some of those misconceptions that you have about the product. And as always, we try to be as honest as possible with the stuff that we sell, and you're more than welcome to stop into our shops, watch the process, watch us install it, hold the film for yourself, play with it, stretch it, whatever. Thank you guys for tuning in.